Thank you. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Thank you for attending this, the Future of Non-Profit Financial Reporting, ASEAN Perspective. So my name is Nurul Atika, country champion for Malaysia. And I am delighted to welcome you to our session today, which is co-hosted by Philandio and ASEAN Federation of Accountants, together with the IFR for NPO project. So much as the primary audience is key stakeholders in ASEAN, I know we have had registrations from other countries, so you all are welcome. As I mentioned, my name is Nurul Atika, the project country champion in Malaysia. I am delighted to be joined Auki Pratama, the Executive Director of ASEAN Federation of Accountants, and the IFR for NPO Project Director, Samantha Musoke. Hi, Auki and Sam. Thank you for joining us today. So I also like to welcome the leaders of ASEAN Federation of Accountants and its member organization. We are also expecting the Malaysia Association of Tax Accountant, ACCA Global, EY Philippines, government officials, university representatives, the NPOs from the ASEAN regions especially, and I'm particularly glad to welcome Yayasan Food Bank Malaysia, Impact Hub KL, and Malaysia Relief Agency who have registered to be here with us today. It's great to see so many of you here. Please take a moment to introduce yourself by typing in the chat box so you can mention your name, role, and organizations. All right, so maybe someone can start with your name, roles, and organization in the chat box. So we've got the first one, Sam. All right, hi, Dani, representing Crides, currently serving in IAI Quality Review Board for Accountant. Okay, hi, Dani. All right, the rest of you also can just write in the chat box to introduce yourself. All right, so all right, thank you. We have from Cambodia, Indonesia. All right, so as you can see on your slide on the screen, we actually take note that there are many variations on the terms used for charity bodies. So some would say NPO, NGO, civil society organization, associations. It would also include religious organization, maybe non-profit medical facilities, private school with charity elements in their operation model. So what I'm trying to say here, that the stakeholders in the social development sector, or we call it as the third sector, they are huge. And surely it contributes to the development or growth of our countries. It complementing efforts of governments and plays a vital role in the areas such as disaster relief, development works, human rights, and maybe environmental advocacy. So as you all know, in every country, the basic fundamental sector consists of public sector, private sector, and the third sector. So the public in general could appreciate the importance of the first two sectors, but I've mentioned, so they could recognize the first two sectors as very important, but very less to see the awareness of the significant contribution that the third sector is offering. So it is often to be seen as, the third sector often to be seen as secondary or alternative sector. For example, a graduate may not think of working at NPO as his or her number one choice. People hardly see third sector can offer a good career development journey. And due to this, the sector may not have a good talent pool to progress. Having said this, as the third sector is commonly less regulated, it leaves too many loopholes for illegal activities to happen. For example, money laundering, misappropriation of funds, etc. So IFR for NPO is taking the lead to ensure at least there is a useful guidance specifically on financial reporting standard that could be used and relevant for the stakeholders all over the world. And for our today's context, that will be for the ASEAN region. So your participation today, especially the accountants, the auditors, the academicians, the professionals, brings a new hope for better growth for the NPO sector. It really needs the attention from the subject matter experts. So with that note, I would like to welcome Mr. Oki to continue the next agenda of the session. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Nurul, and ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning from Jakarta, Indonesia. It's certainly a pleasure for us to welcome you to today's webinar for the ASEAN Federation of Accountants, or AFA. Today's focus on non-profit financial reporting is indeed an important part of our ongoing effort in supporting adoption and implementation of international standards and best practice in the ASEAN jurisdictions. As with the IFRS accounting standards, internationally applicable reporting guidance for non-profit financial reporting will provide better clarity and consistency. And this is certainly something that many stakeholders will hopefully appreciate. But before we proceed, I would like to invite AFA President, Mr. Borawit Chantanako, to deliver his remarks.
Leaders and members of our partners, the IFR4 NPO and Philander, members of our Alpha member organizations, participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to our webinar. On behalf of Alpha, I am pleased to welcome you today to our final event for the year 2022. Has been another productive event for Alpha and our member organizations with more than 65 meetings, workshops, conferences, and webinars, publications, and attendance in our stakeholders' events recorded. After a long year of focusing on sustainability, technology, and continuing development for our ASEAN professional accountancy organizations, I am excited to end our year with a look into the future for non-profit financial reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, Alpha is honored to be allowed the opportunity to work with our co-organizers today, the IFR4 NPO and Philander. I think today would be a good opportunity to introduce and expose our ASEAN stakeholders to both organizations' excellent work in the non-profit space. Unlike the profit sector with its IFRS or public sector with IPSAS, there is no single accepted international standard exists specific for organizations in the non-profit sector. This leads to different challenges faced by non-profit organizations and their stakeholders, such as founders, auditors, and regulators, from inconsistent reporting to lack of clarity of reported information that may contribute to funding decisions. There is the need for a standard to serve as a different. Our guests from the IFR4 NPO and Philander today will share their insights into non-profit financial reporting. IFRS NPO in particular, we share about its guidance for non-profit financial reporting. I certainly hope that you will take this opportunity to learn from them and share our ASEAN perspective on future consultation about the proposed standards. Ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by thanking once again our partners, the IFR4 NPO and Philander, of our collaboration today. My appreciation as well for everyone participating today. I hope you will find today's sharing useful and informative. Alpha will continue with our commitment to work with our member organizations, partners, and stakeholders to share relevant updates in the profession to our ASEAN stakeholders. I look forward to inviting you to our events and activity next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Borawit. Ladies and gentlemen, representative of the AFA member organizations and indeed the ASEAN stakeholders present today will be familiar with the IFRS accounting standards and possibly the International Public Sector Accounting Standard or IPSAS. Both are the recognized international accounting standards used by for-profit organizations and government when producing their annual audited accounts. But there is no equivalent international standards for nonprofits. We know that some countries have their own national standards, but not many. And we know there is a variety of practice in the region, including in ASEAN. So please do let us know in the chat column if your country has a national standard for the preparation of general purpose financial statements, which standards NPOs tend to use, and whether NPOs are required to file accounts. So we would like to definitely hear from you on some of this information. So do share in the chat function. And as you do that, I will hand over to Sam to tell us about the IFR for NPO project. Over to you, Sam.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Oki. And thank you so much, Nurul, as well, for your kind introductions. And it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be partnering with the ASEAN Federation of Accountants and Philander today for this session. Allow me just to introduce myself briefly. Samantha Musoke is my name. I am English, as you can probably hear, but I have lived in Uganda for 21 years. That's in East Africa. I'm a chartered accountant by profession, and I've been working those 20 years plus within the sector for non-profit organizations as a staff member, as a finance staff, as a board member, as a financial advisor. I've worked in both local and international INGOs and as an auditor. So I've seen the sector from various angles. In the UK, we have a non-profit standard for charities. And when I grew up and was developing as a professional, I grew up in this space knowing that the standard existed. And I didn't stop to think what it would feel like to operate in an environment where there wasn't a relevant standard. And then when I moved to Uganda and discovered there wasn't, and was auditing here and working in this environment, realized how complicated it is. So I was very honored to be added to this project when we launched in 2019 as the project director for Humentum for this project, because I really have felt the difficulties of having no standard. So it's my privilege today to tell you a bit about the IFR for NPO project so that you as stakeholders in the ASEAN region can share your voices and opinions on this project. So let's start with looking at the problem. What is the problem? I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of a problem tree. It's something that we use in the sector quite often. So as I mentioned, only a few countries have bespoke standards for non-profit organizations, which means there is inequity and inefficiency in the system. Now, obviously, different issues are experienced by various stakeholders, such as funders, non-profit organizations, auditors, regulations, and society.
Sorry, Sam, to interrupt.
That's okay.
I think the slide is quite blurry. So can you reshare again?
All right, let me try that. It could just be my internet. Let's hope. A little better. How's that?
Not quite sharp, but it's readable. What do you think? Okay, is it okay?
Yeah, I think we can use this for now, Sam, because again, audience participants, all of this information, including the slides, hopefully, Sam, and the recording of this session will be shared with everyone. We will make everything public after this as well, so we
All
can
right.
just focus on Sam sharing for now.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Nora. So with funders, if we start with, well, let's start with NPOs. Often complain about the burden of multiple reporting formats for different donors. If you work in an NPO and you're in finance, you probably spend most of your time preparing reports for donors. But also even board members or senior managers may lack good information about their indicators of financial health, such as levels of reserves or unrestricted income. If you're using for-profit standards, this information isn't necessarily readily available. Funders have often said that when they look at the audited accounts of most organizations that they're looking to fund, they don't find them particularly useful. What this means is they do lots of extra work to do their due diligence if they're considering funding an organization. So we have very high costs of due diligence, and this impacts on grantees as well because of all the time and needing to provide extra information. The other thing that funders have expressed is this fear of double funding fraud, where one organization gets funding for the same cost from two funders. And with a focus on project level reporting and grant level reporting, this bigger picture of the whole entity is sometimes missing. If we come to auditors, auditors often have to express their opinion with reference to standards that are designed with for-profit entities in mind, and are left to offer their own solutions where those standards are silent or seem appropriate for NPO issues. And this results in inconsistency because each auditor is finding their own solution. So with no sector-specific standards, there are no sector-specific exams, which means that in some countries, there are very few professionally qualified accountants working in the sector. And Nurul alluded to that earlier. I do understand this is particularly the case in Asia. In Africa, there are many accountants working in the sector because it's a very big sector. Now, finally, if we come to regulators and civil society more broadly, who ought to be able to scrutinize what's happening in the nonprofit sector. When there isn't a standard and there aren't published accounts, that lack of information and transparency can result in a lack of trust. And that trust would be really beneficial to build domestic philanthropy and create an environment where tax exemption for nonprofits is the norm. Nurul shared a slide earlier from the CAPS study that looked at across the health of the nonprofit sector across Asia and the different countries and compares them. And tax exemption and government facilitation, let me say, or an enablement, an enabling environment for the nonprofit sector is part of what they look at. So now these various problems for nonprofits, funders, auditors, they have many different root causes, but if you like, one overarching root cause is the fact that there is no internationally applicable financial reporting standard for these nonprofit organizations. It's a common thread that shows up in all of these challenges. So what's the IFR for NPO project doing about it? Our theory of change states that wide adoption of internationally applicable accounting standard for NPOs, nonprofit organizations, will improve efficiency, create an environment where NPOs have more equitable access to income and financial health. At the moment, those in countries that have standards are better able to present themselves, better able to pass due diligence processes, better able to access funds and understand their own financial health. So that's a problem. The solution that the project is providing is internationally applicable guidance on how NPOs should prepare their annual general purpose financial reports. Now, this guidance will be called INPAG, International Non-Profit Accounting Guidance. Now, just like IFRS, it would be up to each country to decide to adopt or align to INPAG, and whether certain NPOs within their jurisdiction should be required or allowed to follow it. Funders may also recognize it as best practice and encourage its use where entities are allowed to adopt it. The future impacts, the future outcomes and benefits from this, if there is wide adoption, could be really wide-ranging. For NPOs themselves that are applying INPAG, it means that they'll be better able to demonstrate their capacity and attract funds, as well as supporting the provision of decision-useful information for governance and for management. For funders, it can contribute to better and more efficient due diligence, which is a win for NPOs as well. And having clear guidance simplifies and improves the value of audit assurance associated with those general purpose financial statements. Now, one of the really important outcomes for this project, separate from the guidance itself, is the creation of a global community of stakeholders able to engage and collaborate to solve sector-wide issues. And this really has never existed before. Ultimately, we believe that this guidance will contribute to a more efficient, equitable and accountable sector that's better able to attract, generate and utilize funds to achieve positive social good. That's what the whole sector is about, achieving positive social good. But the numbers are part of that story. So let's clarify which financial reports are we talking about. Now, the IFR for NPO project is focusing on the general purpose financial statements and accompanying narrative reports. These are also known as the annual audited accounts. They're for the entity as a whole rather than for a specific project or grant. And they're designed to be useful for a range of readers or users rather than being produced to meet the needs of one specific reader. Now, to be clear, that the primary focus of this project is not the harmonization of donor reporting formats. If you're an NPO and you produce reports for your funders, each in their own formats, that's not something that we have the authority to change, and that's not the primary focus. But wouldn't that be a nice and welcome byproduct? So what we are hoping is to use INPAG as a route to support the potential harmonization of donor reporting as well. So INPAG will cover the formats in the main financial statements, like the income statement and the balance sheet, or the statement of financial position, but it will also include the option for a supplementary statement or statements for specific donors or projects in a standard format. And of course, donors are being consulted extensively during the development of this supplementary statement format. So what this means is that individual donors have a choice. They could choose to rely on the general purpose financial statements for the financial assurance associated with their project. And this would reduce audit burden and audit cost. Donors could choose to align their own format to the INPAG format. They might still request separate reports and they still might request a separate audit, but even if they used a common format, that would still reduce duplication and complexity. And finally, they could, of course, choose to maintain their current practice and not jump on this opportunity. But what we think that INPAG could bring, but we cannot guarantee, is a pathway, if you like, to offer greater harmonization of donor reporting formats over time. Just to reiterate, donor reporting is not our primary focus, but we hope it could be a very welcome byproduct. So what are the key questions? People often ask questions when I'm talking about the project. And the ones that are most often asked, and I hope you will be also asking questions in the chat and have your own questions, but usually we're asked, who is delivering this project? Why not IASB? Why not the accounting standard setters? Who are you anyway? How is this guidance being developed? What's the process? And which which types of NPO is it designed for? So let's have a look at some of those questions now. So the project is being implemented by two organizations in partnership. That's Humentum and CIPFA. Maybe let me first start with why it's not being implemented by the International Accounting Standards Board. Oh, there we are. So back in 2014, there was a major survey done to find out if there was demand around the world for an international standard for nonprofit organizations. It was respondents from 179 countries, and 72% said, yes, we would like to have an international standard for nonprofits. Interestingly, those countries that already had their own standard weren't that bothered because they didn't really feel the pain of what it's like functioning without their own standard. We as Mango, we were then, as a different organization, put this research to the IASB, and they put an agenda consultation in 2015 as to whether the IASB should consider developing this guidance. They decided they shouldn't. It was outside their mandate and they didn't have the resources, but they acknowledged that it was necessary. Now, I think on balance, it's probably just as well because their current focus on sustainability guidance is so important for the for-profit sector. And I think this would have been a distraction. But because they said no, and the IPSASB also said no, this is not our mandate, we have gone ahead to develop it ourselves by the sector for the sector. So Humentum and CIPFA, let me tell you about these organizations. Humentum, who I work for, is a leading global nonprofit working with humanitarian and development organizations to improve how they operate and to make the whole community more equitable, accountable, and resilient. We convene NPO professionals and we inspire sector-wide change. We have a strong focus on financial management as well, and we offer a range of training and consultancy, especially in the area of finances. But we're not standard setters, and we have never written standards before. Fortunately, we have partnered with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. That's a UK-based professional accountancy organization, and they've had standard setting roles, both for local government and for charities in the UK. CIPFA also plays a really important role as an international convener on public sector accounting issues. Both Humentum and CIPFA are themselves NPOs. I should also say that CIPFA's chair of standards, who's very involved in IFR for NPO as the chair of the technical advisory group, is also the chair of IPSASB, the same individual, although it's two roles. So between us, these two partners, we're connected to a range of stakeholders within the sector that's critical to the project. So this really is by the sector, for the sector. Then seed funding to enable the project to launch has come from the Ford Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. I should mention that no funder has influence over the outcome or contents of the guidance. Now, the project team is very small, but we do draw on the expertise of advisory groups who offer their perspective and experience on a voluntary basis. So the technical advisory group here, you can see, comprises national accounting standard setters from 5 continents, and we also have an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. They come to the meetings and they are following what we're doing very closely. So you can see there the flags we have Bileng Tan from the Malaysian Accounting Standards Board, has been a very active member of that technical advisory group. which has been incredibly important. This group was born out of the International Federation of Accounting Standards Setters non-profit working group. So this is something that the International Accounting Standards Setters are interested in. Many of the member countries already have their own national standards for non-profits, but they're different from each other, and they're keen to learn from each other and also develop something that would be applicable and appropriate for other countries. Now, those are the standard setters. We also have a practitioner advisory group, which includes preparers, users, auditors, and academics specializing in non-profits. So these would be the people who'd be using the guidance or using the financial statements of NPOs. Now, we are proactively seeking to build and maintain diversity in all of these groups. Information about each member and details of all the meetings can be found on the project website so that the process is fully transparent. Now, another group that we have is the donor reference group. Now, during the project outreach sessions early on, it was highlighted that for many NPOs, most of the financial reporting effort and the accounting system set up, it's all driven largely by the requirements of their donors. And we were told by NPOs, if our donors don't recognize this guidance as best practice, it won't be helpful for us. It will just be another thing that we have to do. Rather than reducing burden, it could increase burden. So we set up the donor reference group specifically to seek their input and hopefully secure their support and ultimate endorsement of INPAG. These meetings are not published, but we do share reports on key outputs as appropriate. For example, we published a report on how donors make use of general purpose financial reports of grantees and potential grantees and how they could be made more useful. Another group that we have is the Supplementary Statement Working Group. Now, this group is supporting the development of this supplementary statement that I mentioned earlier. It's a standard format for a report that's for a specific donor or project, but embedded as a supplementary statement within the annual audited accounts for the entity as a whole. This working group is drawn from 6 members from the other groups, and we plan to share this proposal for this format in November 23. Now, beyond these advisory, reference and working groups, the project is engaging with stakeholders all over the world. And as individuals from ASEAN and across Asia, you're absolutely more than welcome to join the 10,000 or so people that are on this journey with us. Now, the project is engaging with a wide range of stakeholders because awareness, input, and buy-in from each group is really necessary for success. And then we have as preparers, NPOs as preparers of financial statements. And there you're really ranging from very small national nonprofit organizations through to large international ones and everything in between. We also have their auditors, and these auditors may be local firms or part of international networks. And auditors are often members of their own national institute or professional accountancy organization, which may be connected to international accounting and standard setting bodies, just like Malaysian Institute of Accountancy is part of ASEAN Federation of Accountants, for example. But the ultimate decision maker in each country, at each country level, is usually some sort of government body or government regulator who would have the power to require or allow NPOs in their jurisdiction to adopt INPAG. So really crucial that we can see all these, that we engage with all these different organizations. And also the users of the financial statements, the donors, the funders who might use it as part of due diligence, the stakeholders or beneficiaries or society more broadly who should be able to hold these organizations to account and or support them with funding because they value what they do. Now, hopefully you can see yourself somewhere in this diagram, which is why we're very glad that you're here with us today. Would you help us with the next slide, please, Noel? So the next is to get a sense of how and when is this happening. So INPAG is being developed using a 3-phase process, which is equivalent to all other standard setting processes. Phase 1, which is now complete, was the consultation phase, and the key output was a 280-page consultation paper, which presented questions for structured input from stakeholders. The second phase is this development phase where we are now, where we analyze the feedback from the consultation and use that as an evidence base to develop draft guidance, which is exposed for comment. And that's called an exposure draft. We'll come back to that later. And then the third phase takes stock of the feedback from the exposure draft, puts through changes before launching the final guidance, which is expected in early 2025. Now, this sounds slow and it sounds like it's a long time in the future, but by standards of accounting standard development, this is Formula One. It is pretty quick. It normally takes decades to develop. We were told when we first started it would take 40 years, and we're trying to do it in 6. So this really is quite quick. Now, obviously, developing INPAG and having guidance is really the beginning. The benefits will really felt after it's widely adopted. So that's this final section really is training and transition following adoption. So that's why there are 2 key aspects of the IFR for MPO project design. One aspect is the technical rigor applied in the guidance development process, which is led by SIPFA. The other aspect is the stakeholder engagement, which is led by Humentum, where we're actively reaching out to stakeholders all over the world so that you can participate in the development process. So that once it's ready, there is already awareness, there's a willingness to adopt it because you've been part of the development process. Next slide, please. No. So about the guidance development model. Now, for those of you that are not accountants, this might look a bit technical, so please don't worry. This slide is not for you. But for those of you that are, I want to explain to you how we're developing this guidance. We're going to be using the International Financial Reporting Standard for Small and Medium Entities Accounting Standards with its 30+ sections as a starting point. Now, that is written for the for-profit environment for small and medium entities or non-public entities. So some sections will be modified as needed. They'll be thoroughly reviewed and updated to reflect NPO specific requirements. Now, examples of such sections include concepts and pervasive principles and the presentation of financial statements. Some completely new sections will be added where there is no existing relevant section that can be modified. An example for this would be a totally new section on narrative reporting. Any modifications or additions will draw on other international or national standards. So we won't be reinventing any wheels or starting from scratch. We're mostly drawing on what already exists around the world and building a best of the best. And if something is relevant in the for-profit sector and the same is also true in the non-profit sector, we want to be consistent so that as a professional in the sector, when you're training, you don't suddenly find this different terms or different concepts where they are fundamentally the same across different sectors. Now, we don't have an unlimited time or unlimited budget to deliver INPAG, so we prioritize the most important topics to address by 2025. For the remaining topics, some sections will be aligned so that they're consistent with other sections. But in the longer term, we hope that one day this INPAG guidance will be issued by a formal international accounting standard setting body and become known as INPAS, the INPAS standard, and stand alongside IFRS and IPSAS. That's the long-term dream, but we have to walk before we can run. So for the moment, it's called guidance because it's not issued by a standard setting body formally. Okay, could you help me with the next slide, please, Nora? So one of the other frequently asked questions is which NPOs? And we are trying here to solve for the NPOs in the middle, not the tiny community-based organizations for whom cash accounting is sufficient to meet their needs, not the very complicated entities for whom IFRS might be appropriate, such as if they hold public debt or have public accountability, but for the vast majority of organizations in between. They need to track assets and liabilities, and they need guidance that's relevant. I'm going to carry on, actually, Nurul. Let's move on to the exposure draft. And I want to explain to you how you can participate. So on the 20th of November, we launched our first exposure draft, and I'd love to spend a few minutes telling you about that. So if you want to just click through all of these. So this is a roadmap. So I want to tell you the sort of overall project plan so that you can see how, as stakeholders in ASEAN, you can contribute. So the analysis of the consultation paper responses was presented on 2nd February 2022, and there's a summary on the project website as well. The analysis from the consultation paper will form the basis for the development of the draft guidance. And this is being done in 3 tranches of work, each culminating in the release of an exposure draft. And then after each exposure draft, there's a 4-month consultation period, during which there'll be webinars, regional consultation meetings, etc. So you're all invited to submit your responses in writing via the website. Now, obviously, the feedback from those will go to create the final impact. So if we could go to the next slide, and we'll take a closer look at what's in this first exposure draft, ED1. It's going to cover, well, let me say, yes, so we launched it in November, open for responses until the 31st of March. You're welcome to give comments on anything, but the advisory groups have set out 37 specific questions or matters for comment that they're particularly keen to get your feedback on. These are areas, for example, where there isn't universal agreement, and we're like, well, let's put it to the public. What do they think? So these are certain areas where we're particularly keen to get your feedback. And there's some nice links there where you can view the exposure draft, share your views, and get more information. If we could go to the next slide, please, Nora. There are 4 topics specifically in ED1 that's covered. Yeah, that one, exactly, that's it. So the first is a description of NPOs and the reporting entity. Which NPOs fall within the description of an NPO for our purposes? Now, some large organizations have country offices or branches in different countries, so we need to also think about what is included within a reporting entity. Now, this guidance is most especially useful for regulators who would be thinking about which entities within their own jurisdictions should apply the guidance, rather than for NPOs themselves. The second major topic is a framework for impact, sort of foundational ideas about who the users of financial statements are in the NPO context, what are their information needs, and also the concepts and pervasive principles that will underpin all the other sections. The third major area is the financial statements, the structure and format for how these will look. And the fourth area is the narrative report, which will include both analysis and commentary on the financials, but also information about the performance of the NPO in terms of its public benefit objectives. What does it exist for? What does it set out to do? And what has it done during the year? Next slide, please, Nora. That's it. Brilliant. So I'm actually going to hand over here. That's my whistle-stop tour of the IFR for NPO project, and I'm delighted to hand it back to Nurul to take it from here.
All right, thank you, Sam. A very technical kind of content, but I'm pretty sure most of the audience could appreciate that because they are professional, they are accountants, they are auditors. It's their language. So basically, as a country champion, what I need to do is reaching out as wider as I can for the stakeholders, and also to help in terms of localizing or cascading the guidance later once it's completed. So the steps has been taken, small step has been taken to start the awareness, in having this guidance in place, and which is the most important thing is to make it relevant for each country's context. So as for ASEAN or Malaysia strategy, we focus on the engagement in development leads to greater chance of adoption. So previous months, we have made a conversation with the Registrar of Societies in Malaysia. So they already know what we are doing now. So they're just waiting for the next steps on how we can, or maybe the stakeholder in Malaysia can benefit from here. So the goal is, so we want to make sure the international guidance doesn't get written without the expertise of professionals from Malaysia or ASEAN, and without perspective and input from stakeholders from ASEAN. So in order to have a voice, we need to be aware of the proposal being made and the questions, as what Sam told us just now. We should be visiting the websites and subscribing to the project emails and attending webinars. If you would like to share our opinions, some people will be invited to regional consultation events and focus group discussions, and all of us are free to submit written responses to the question in the exposure draft. So who should be involved? Any one of you here are welcome. Individuals from any relevant stakeholders, as well as consultants and trainers. So the project is particularly keen to receive responses from organization as well. If you are interested in coordinating a response from your organization, you can register as an organization champion, and the project will be able to provide some guidance for you in that role. We are also keen to establish a small country working group with interested parties from across the sector that can discuss and debate the questions from a country-wide perspective. So for Malaysia, I would like to share a bit. We have actually initiated a physical session on 29th of June, 2022. So those listed items, the five are the five so-called resolution that we obtained from the discussions. All right, so things are moving, things are happening, but in a smaller scale. So I would like to call upon all the relevant stakeholders, especially in Malaysia, for the next upcoming events about the IFR for NPO. All right. So here are some useful website links for you, if you which you will be able to access from the PDF file that will be shared with you. So take this opportunity. The single most important message we would like you to take away from this whole session is this: we have an opportunity of a generation to shape the future. Please engage with the project and share your voice during the consultation processes. So how can I stay engaged? You can see here some of the links you can use to stay in touch with the project. Please sign up for the newsletter and also follow the project on social media. We will be sharing the slides and video of this event on our website. It really helps people to engage and access the free resources if we have a shareable code from participants. So if you enjoyed your time with us today, please take a few minutes to type something in the chat box that we could use it on our social media or the website. All right, so feel free to drop any feedback in the chat box. So we've got, I think, a few minutes left. I think maybe we could give about 5 minutes for the Q&A session. You can drop your question in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Ersa from Indonesia. I have a question in the chat, but my question basically on do you define what do you mean by NPO? Because in Indonesia, that is one of our challenges. What do we mean by NPO? Because it's a very wide variety from foundation, education, charities, group, political parties, and also there are big entities, quasi-government entities, that is by law, they are non-profit, but sometimes these entities are behaving like business entities, you know. So there are some entities that are very clear they are NPO, like charities, organization, very clear. But there are so many entities that are required to be non-profit by law, but they are behaving like business entities. So because of these difficulties to whether it should be substance over form or form over substance in Indonesia, the Indonesian Accounting Standard Board then asked the entities to review themselves, whether they are NPO or not, if they want to use the NPO standard. So basically, we only have one standard of the presentation of financial statement. The rest they can use IFRS for SME or they can use IFRS, because we think that the much difference is on the presentation of the financial statement. The rest they can follow the current standard. So number one question is whether you will define what is NPO or you give that self-evaluation to the entities. And number two, whether the standard going to be like a full standard like IFRS now, you have conceptual framework and a fixed PPE and so on, or you only create those who thinks is specifically unique for NPO. For example, fund accounting, donor accounting, and the rest, they can follow whatever standard that are available now. In that case, we don't reinvent the wheel. But I'm not sure what are you going to do next for this. Are you going to have a full handbook so they don't need to look at IFRS for SME? They don't need to look at the standard, just this standard, or just addition of what the currently they are having? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arsa. So I believe Sam is the most suitable person to answer that.
Absolutely, those are excellent questions, Ersa. Thank you so much. So the first one, yes, the guidance does in PAG will say who we believe are NPOs. In a nutshell, I can explain it here, but there is a 16-minute video that's coming up shortly that will provide much more guidance on that. And you can also look in the exposure draft. So there are three aspects to the broad characteristics of NPOs. One is that they exist, their primary purpose is public benefit. And we just describe a lot in the application guidance what we mean by public benefit. They don't have a primary objective of generating funds or income or profit. Their primary purpose is a public benefit purpose. The second broad characteristic, that if they generate surpluses from their activities, those surpluses are plowed back into their public benefit activities. They're not distributed to individuals. The third is that they are not government entities that ought to be applying IPSAS. So interestingly, that speaks to many of the points that you mentioned. It also says in the guidance that some of this is very difficult to apply and will require judgment. And they've also added some indicators which might add some help in deciding whether you're an NPO, if the first three broad characteristics still leave some gaps. So those indicators, I don't have them in front of me, but from memory, it's around having voluntary income. So grants and donations are a common feature of non-profit organizations, not always though. Holding assets which do not generate income, but actually just fulfill a public benefit purpose. What happens to your net assets on dissolution? So if you were to dissolve, would that go to individuals? Would it be passed to beneficiaries? What happens to dissolution? That can tell you quite a lot about the structure. And there's one other that I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, there is guidance, and it's primarily for governments to decide, to use that guidance to decide which, as you say, there's so much variety in different countries. Every country has different laws and different descriptions of different types of NPOs. So we can't be too prescriptive, which is why we've gone for broad characteristics and indicators approach. So I hope that answers your question. Excellent question. The second question about what will it actually look like and will it cover everything? Also very important, and we discussed this at great length. Shall we do a companion guide so that you're looking at IFRS for SME here in one hand, and then you've got a non-profit add-on, Or should we try and do something that's integrated, a kind of one-stop shop where I've got the whole thing and this is everything I need, and yet we need it to be consistent? So we've gone for the second option. What we'll end up with is INPAG as one booklet, just like IFRS for SME. That's why we're starting with IFRS for SME, and we have a license agreement with the IFRS Foundation to use IFRS for SME. Like PPE, there's not much difference in PPE accounting for a non-profit and a for-profit. So that section doesn't need changing. It is what it is, and we want it to be consistent between sectors where there's no real need for it to be NPO specific. You asked about a conceptual framework. It takes years to develop those, and we've decided not to yet at this moment develop a standalone conceptual framework. But section 2 of IFRS for SME and section 2 of INPAG does cover the concepts and pervasive principles, and we have amended that to introduce, for example, this concept of service potential, which is a way of valuing assets that can add benefit to society, even if they don't have, they don't generate any economic, what's it called? UEL, the economic, I've forgotten my accounting terms. But anyway, the income generated by assets. Well, does that mean you have to impair all your assets as an NPO because they're not generating income? No, that's why we've introduced this concept of service potential as an important concept for NPOs and others. So I hope that answers both your excellent questions. And I think there's still 2 minutes for one or two more if there are other questions.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Welcome.
All right. Any more question? You can just unmute. Yeah.
Hi, Faisal here from Mata, Malaysia, Malaysian Institute of Tax Accountant. My question is regard to more toward tax issues. Okay, generally this NPO may be exposed to some tax issues, particularly that any contribution received may be the tax authority, unless it is approved, it's approved contribution, generally will require this to be taxed, and also taxes and the liability capitalized, like to make for them to make payment. And on top of that, also there are multiple income that may be received by this NPO in the process of generating revenue for good causes, of course. But again, that can be subject to tax as well, because it fall under the category or may be defined as a business income. To this NPO. So basically, this IFRS, my question is that is there any tax issue has been looked into this, and then whether there's any potentially want to align it with the tax regulation, so that it may be easier for any NPO, that organization itself, to manage the tax issue well and efficiently.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And I'll try and answer in 30 seconds. The short answer is no, we're not addressing any taxation issues in INPAG because it's really up to each government, and the tax environment for NPOs varies greatly. So some countries have full tax exemption for NPOs. Other countries, you have to apply for exemption, and it's only certain types of income, etc., etc. So what there will be in the guidance is how do you disclose any tax liability or tax expense in the year, if it exists, but how much that tax is and how it's calculated will be entirely up to national tax authorities, just as it is for corporation taxes. And that's why there is this note that reconciles the profit as disclosed in your for-profit financial statements to your profit for tax purposes. It would be equivalent, I think, for INPAG, because as a international accounting standard setter, that we don't have a mandate to cover anything to do with taxes in any given jurisdiction. So I hope that answers that question. You still have all your freedom as the tax authority to do what you need to do, but hopefully greater consistency and transparency to understand what's happening. One thing, let me say very quickly, in Uganda, I will not speak for Malaysia. In Uganda, we've sometimes seen tax authorities seeing a surplus of income over expenses and thinking of the surplus as a profit. And they're completely different things. And we think that sometimes in some countries, the tax authorities don't really understand necessarily what's happening financially. And an international standard will really help that communication between nonprofits and tax authorities, because there'll be an international standard that's defining some of the terms and concepts that could be helpful. So let me stop there. We've overrun with time. So back to you, Nurul.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Faisal, for asking, and also Sam for answering perfectly the questions. So I guess we are already time. So thank you so much to those who are attending the session. We hope this is an eye-opener for you. Maybe this is your first time hearing about this initiative. We are all passionate people who wants to make a better world through our knowledge and skills. So whatever that we have, we want to contribute back to the people. So thank you so much. Maybe Oki and Sam, we can stay for a while after this. And so thank you. So should we take a group picture or something, Sam? Do you want? I cannot hear you, sorry.
Oh, let me try and take a picture. That would be nice. So can we have a smile? One.
All right. Can
two,
you open
three.
your camera?
Put your
everyone?
camera on. Look your best. Well, oh, it's so nice to see all the faces. Okay.
We should do this often.
That's lovely. I've got a nice picture. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to all the newsletters and everything. All the links are in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Nurul.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.